Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Missoula Public Library's Night of 1,000 Stars. I'm Bob Barino from FM 102 Radio. It's very much an honor for me to have been asked to MC the event this evening, along with Sheila Callahan, the owner of KMSO FM 102. Tonight, the Missoula Public Library joins thousands of libraries all over the United States, focusing national attention on family literacy and the importance of families reading together. This event is sponsored by the American Library Association and the American Association of School Librarians. Here in Missoula, we will be presenting 14 of Missoula's stars reading and telling stories. Incidentally, this program is being cablecast live on Missoula's Community Access Television at Channel 22. And this will be the library's premier access program, and this is the first live remote broadcast for Community Access TV, and we're very happy to be a part of that this evening. Let's begin our program this evening. It's a real pleasure to introduce to you Lynn Hightower. Lynn is the anchor reporter for KPAX TV. Would you please welcome Lynn? She has a selection from The Last Best Place.
It was easy to pick a story from Montana's history is something I wanted to read. That's what I love reading, but when you have a book this big, it was difficult to pick something out of it. What I chose was a story by Two Moon, as told to Hamlin Garland. Two Moon, a Northern Cheyenne chief, participated in the Battle of the Little Bighorn on June 25th, 1876. His account of the battle offers an almost Grecian version of the conflict, a battle played out for the amusement of the great spirits. Through an interpreter, Two Moon told his story to writer Hamlin Garland, who published the account in the September 1898 issue of McClure's magazine. And after I finish reading Two Moon's account, I will read just a couple of paragraphs written by Custer's wife and what she was doing the day of the battle. General Custer's last fight, as seen by Two Moon, the battle described by a chief who took part in it. That spring, 1876, I was camped on Powder River with 50 lodges of my people, Cheyennes. The place is near what is now Fort McKinney. One morning, soldiers charged my camp. They were in command of Three Fingers, Colonel Mackenzie. We were surprised and scattered, leaving our ponies. The soldiers ran all our horses off. That night, the soldiers slept, leaving the horses one side, so we crept up and stole them back, and then we went away. We traveled far, and one day we met a big camp of Sioux at Charcoal Butte. We camped with the Sioux and had good time, plenty grass, plenty game, plenty good water. Crazy Horse was head chief of the camp. Sitting Bull was camped a little ways below on the Little Missouri River. Crazy Horse said to me, "I'm glad you are come. We are going to fight the white man again." The camp was already full of wounded men, women, and children. I said to Crazy Horse, "All right, I am ready to fight. I have fought already. My people have been killed, my horses stolen. I am satisfied to fight." Here an old man paused a moment, and his face took on a lofty and somber expression. I believed at that time the great spirits had made the Sioux, put them there, he drew a circle to the right, and white men and Cheyenne here, indicating two places to the left, expecting them to fight. The great spirits, I thought, liked to see the fight. It was to them all the same like playing. So I thought then about fighting, and he said this, and made me feel for one moment the power of a sardonic God whose drama was the wars of men. About May, when the grass was tall and the horses strong, we broke camp and started across the country to the mouth of the Tongue River. Then Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse went all to the Rosebud. There we had a big fight with General Cook and whipped him. Many soldiers were killed, few Indians. It was a great fight, much smoke and dust. From there, we all went over the divide and camped in the valley of Little Horn. Everybody thought, now we are out of the white man's country. Here we can live, and they will live there. After a few days, one morning when I was in camp north of Sitting Bull, a Sioux messenger rode up and said, "Let everybody paint up, cook, and get ready for a big dance." Cheyennes then went to work to cook up, cut up tobacco, and get ready. We all thought to dance all day. We were very glad to think we were far away from the white man. I went to water my horses at the creek and washed them off with cool water, then took a swim myself. I came back to the camp afoot. When I got near my lodge, I looked up the Little Horn towards Sitting Bull's camp. I saw a great dust rising. It looked like a whirlwind. Soon, Sioux horsemen came rushing into the camp shouting, "Soldiers come, plenty white soldiers." I ran into my lodge and said to my brother-in-law, "Get your horses, the white man is coming. Everybody run for horses." Outside, far up the valley, I heard a battle cry, "Hey, hey!" I heard shooting, too, this way. I couldn't see any Indians. Everyone was getting their horses and saddles. After I caught my horse, a Sioux warrior came again and said, "Many soldiers are coming." He said then to the women, "Get out of the way. We are going to have a hard fight." I said, "All right, I am ready." I got on my horse and rode out into my camp. I called out to the people all running about, "I am Two Moon, your chief. Don't run away. Stay here and fight. You must stay and fight the white soldiers. I shall stay, even if I am to be killed." I rode swiftly toward Sitting Bull's camp. There I saw white soldiers fighting in a line. They were Reno's men. Indians covered the flat. They began to drive the soldiers, all mixed up. Sioux, then soldiers, then more Sioux, and all shooting. The air was full of smoke and dust. I saw the soldiers fall back and drop into the riverbed like buffalo fleeing. They had no time to look for a crossing. The Sioux chased them up the hill, where they met more soldiers in wagons, and then messengers came saying, "More chiefs, more soldiers. We're going to kill the women," and the Sioux turned back. Chief Gall was there, Crazy Horse also. I then rode toward my camp and stopped squaws from carrying off lodges. While I was sitting on my horse, I saw flags coming up the hill to the east, like that. He raised his fingers. Then the soldiers rose all at once, all on horses, like this. He put his fingers behind each other to indicate they were marching in rows. They formed into 3 bundles with a little ways between. Then a bugle sounded, and they all got off horses, and some soldiers led the horses back over the hill. Then the Sioux rode up on the ridges on all sides, riding very fast. The Cheyennes went up to the left. Then the shooting was quick, like pop, 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 very fast. Some of the soldiers were down on their knees, some standing, all officers in front. The smoke was like a great cloud, and everywhere the Sioux went, the dust rose like smoke. We circled all around them, swirling like water around a stone. We shoot, we ride fast, we shoot again. Soldiers drop and horses fall on them. Soldiers in a line. But one man rides up and down the line, all the time shouting. He rode a sorrel horse with a white face and white forelegs. I don't know who he was, but he was a brave man. Indians kept swirling round and round, and the soldiers killed only a few. Many soldiers fell. At last, all horses killed but 5. Once in a while, some man would break out and run toward the river, but he would fall. At last, about 100 men and 5 horsemen stood on the hill, all bunched together. All along, the bugler kept blowing his commands. He was very brave, too. Then a chief was killed. I hear it was Longhair, Custer. I don't know. But then the 5 horsemen and the bunch of men, maybe 40 or so, started toward the river. The man on the sorrel horse led them, shouting all the time. He wore a buckskin shirt, had long black hair, and a mustache. He fought with a big knife. His men were all covered in white dust. I couldn't tell whether they were officers or not. One man rode all alone up and down toward the river and around up the hill. I thought he was going to escape, but a Sioux fired and hit him in the head. He was the last man. He wore braids on his arms, which means he was a sergeant. All the soldiers were now killed, and the bodies were stripped. After that, no one could tell which were officers. The bodies were left where they were. We had no dance that night. We were sorrowful. Next day, 4 Sioux chiefs and 2 Cheyennes and I, Two Moon, went up onto the battlefield to count the dead. One man carried a bundle of sticks. When we came to a dead man, we took a little stick and gave it to another man, so we counted the dead. There were 388. There were 39 Sioux and 7 Cheyenne killed and about 100 wounded. Some white soldiers were cut with knives to make sure they were dead. The war woman had mangled some. Most of them were left where they fell. We came to the man with the big mustache. He lay down toward the river. The Indians did not take his buckskin shirt. The Sioux said, "That is a big chief. That is Longhair." I don't know. I had never seen him. The man on the white-faced horse was the bravest man. That day, as the sun was getting low, our young men came up the Little Bighorn riding hard. Many white soldiers were coming in a big boat, and when we looked up, we could see the smoke rising. I called my people together. We hurried up the Little Horn into Rotten Grass Valley. We camped there for 3 days, then rode swiftly back over our old trail to the east. Sitting Bull went back into the Rosebud and down the Yellowstone and away to the north. I did not see him again. That was Two Moon's account of Custer's last stand. At the same time, Elizabeth Custer Custer's wife, was at a nearby fort somewhere in the Dakotas, and she was writing of her life's last chapter with her husband. The day she wrote, it was Sunday, June 25th, that day in 1876, the Battle of Little Bighorn. On Sunday afternoon, June 25th, our little group of saddened women, wives of other soldiers, borne down with one common weight of anxiety, sought solace in gathering together in our house. We tried to find some slight relief from the trouble in those old hymns we sang. Some of them dated back to our childhood days when our mothers rocked us to sleep to their soothing strains. I remember the grief with which one fair young wife threw herself on the carpet and pillowed her head in the lap of a tender friend. Another sat dejected at the piano and struck soft chords that melted into the notes of the voices. All were absorbed in the same thoughts, and their eyes were filled with faraway visions and longings. Indescribable yearning for the absent and untold terror for their safety engrossed each heart. The words of the hymn, "Ere though across it be, nearer my God to thee," came forth with almost a sob from every throat. At that very hour, the fears that our tortured minds had portrayed in imagination were realities, and the souls of those we thought upon were ascending to meet their Maker. On July 5th, for it took that time for the news to come, the sun rose on a beautiful world, but with its earliest beams came the first knell of disaster. A steamer came down the river bearing the wounded from the Battle of the Little Bighorn on Sunday, June 25th. This battle wrecked the lives of 26 women at Fort Lincoln, and orphaned children of officers and soldiers joined the cry to that of their bereaved mothers. From that time, the life went out of the hearts of the women who weep, and God asked them to walk on alone and in the shadow. Thank you.
Lynn Hightower is, as I'm sure you recognize, the anchor reporter for KPAX-TV in Missoula. We appreciate her joining us this evening. We are at the Missoula Public Library. This is the Night of 1,000 Stars. That would be obvious to all of you in the library meeting room. I mention this again for the benefit of those who may be joining us this evening on Missoula Community Access TV. We are pleased to be with you this evening. We still have 13 more readers. Thousands of libraries all over the country this evening are focusing attention on family literacy and the importance of families reading together. The event, as we mentioned at the onset, is sponsored by the American Library Association and American Association of School Librarians. As our program continues this evening, it's an honor to present Sue Talbot. Sue is a community volunteer and a member of the Montana Arts Council. She has an excerpt from Mildred Walker's The Southwest Corner.
Good evening. Mildred Walker, who wrote the book The Southwest Corner, moved to Missoula from Vermont just a very few years ago to live near her daughter. However, she lived and wrote for many years in Great Falls. Now, this book is not about Montana, but is a novel based on the life of a real woman, a woman she knew when she lived in Vermont. Marcia Elder was so quiet, standing in the doorway to the parlor, that early comers to the auction scarcely noticed her. The auctioneer was already here. People, the summer folk and the children and the grandchildren of town people she had always known, were filling the chairs that covered the side lawn. The legs of their chairs would dig holes like small graves in the green grass. But the grass no longer mattered. Tonight the grass would be sold with the house. She had come in once more to see the parlor as it had always been, to fix it in her mind so that she could close her eyes always and see it as it was now. Her wedding picture and John's against the gold and blue wallpaper, the picture of Abraham Lincoln, the two mirrors, one gold-framed with a schoolhouse at the top, the other mahogany. B said the mirrors ought to bring a pretty price. The haircloth sofa, the spring rocker, upholstered in gold plush that was newer than the rest of the things in the room, the marble-top table. Her eyes saw even the conch shell that served as a doorstep. She thought how she had made the hooked rug under the piano stool to protect the flowered Axminster, and now the rest of the carpet had faded and the hooked rug could never be moved. She was like that hooked rug. A wave of anguish rose in her throat. She took hold of the shining white door jamb to steady herself. These were her things. She was being separated from them. She hadn't thought Bea could do a thing like this when it came right down to it. Why hadn't she put her foot down and told Bea no? But Bea had so many arguments, and Bea kept at her so, and she was tired of talking. It couldn't be for long. She was 84 now. As Bea said, she wasn't as strong as she used to be. Sometimes she was dizzy when she stood up quickly. It bothered her more to think about the cold this winter. Bea said her house kept a nice, even heat all over. The auctioneer was beginning. He had taken his place on the doorstep on the north side of the house. Orville would be coming in soon to strip the house, taking things out one by one. Marcia went back to the kitchen that was so big and sunny. The china was packed in bushel baskets to be auctioned off, a pig and a poke. Some good things in with the ordinary dishes. They went faster that way, Bea said. There was her brown teapot that her grandmother had made tea in. She stooped and touched it lovingly. The curve of the handle seemed to fit her hand. The lid was always a little top-heavy, so she had been careful to hold it when she poured tea. She hadn't needed to be so careful all these years. What good was it now? It was funny she didn't feel worse about selling her things. She just felt cold and kind of shaky and far away. Mrs. Elder, there isn't any sense in your getting all worked up and nervous. Why don't you go on up the hill till the auction's over, unless you feel like lying down? Bea's voice was busy. Underneath the busyness, it had a kind of excitement in it. Often just the way she talked made Marcia feel useless. She didn't answer Bea sometimes, but today she said, "No, I'll stay right here." That was the least she could do for these old things that she had known all her life. She went out to sit in the shed where she could watch the auction from the open lattice door. She sat in the rocker that had been her mother's, that Bea had said she might as well keep, she set such a store by it. Bea didn't mean to be unkind. Sitting in the rocker that was going with her to Bea's house, Marcia felt less shaky. Hand-turned the rocker was, and rush-bottomed, the sort of thing the summer people were always trying to buy. Now they were auctioning off the haircloth sofa. The whatnot would go next. The bids were up to $21 on the sofa. She could see Bea's eagerness from where she sat. Bea's nose projected out a little too far, like a dog's on a scent. Marcia had sat on that sofa and listened to Samuel Whitcomb propose when she was 17, and told him no. She could remember how the carved grape cluster on the arm of the sofa had felt to her fingers as she said the words, cool and smooth polished and firm as a person's mind should be. Her mind had not been like that the day John Elder had asked her to marry him and go west. It had been excited and a little fearful about going so far away, but happy about going with John. "Maybe we'll never come back here, Marcia," John said as they drove down Ryder Hill after the wedding, and she hadn't cared. But only a year later she had come back alone, empty-armed. John had been struck dead by lightning in bed beside her out on the ranch in Illinois. She had run out into the dark and stood there in the rain and lightning and thunder, wanting to be killed too. When the dark split open and the lightning showed up the log buildings of the ranch, she hadn't closed her eyes. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of a storm, but nothing happened. She could remember the day she had come back to the valley and driven up to the Hill farm. It had been in August, a day like this. Along the road, the grass was dusty, and Father had said it had been a hot summer. Mother was waiting for her at the front door. It didn't hurt any more to remember these things. It bothered her that it didn't, but they'd happened so long ago. She looked coolly back to the auctioneer. The square piano was going. How pretty the rosewood case was. The piano had stood in the parlor that day she came back. At first she had lived here with her hair up on her head and wearing black dresses, as sober as her mother's, visiting her married sister and helping the neighbors with their babies. And then she'd gone to teaching spelling and penmanship and needlework in the seminary at Alden. That was when she had bought the player piano. "My, Mrs. Elder, I'm pleased to get that whatnot of yours. Seems I've always envied that," Clara Breen stopped to tell her. Folks in the village were all kind. They were sorry to see her leave the hill. She knew they felt Bea wasn't doing right to marry and get her to leave, But they were not close to her, a generation or so younger. She didn't discuss her affairs with anyone. And she was too tired to hold out against B any longer. The piano went for $60, Clara Breen told her. Marcia's father had paid $200 for it. One of the city folks bought it to make into one of those darling old desks, Clara said. It hurt Marcia to think of all the ivory and black keys being ripped out. It seemed as though sound belonged with the rich graining of the wood. The colors of the wood flowed across the case like music. The walnut center table with the marble top went for $1. Nobody wanted those anymore. Don't you want to go in now, Mrs. Elder, B asked. She shook her head. Then I'll get your shawl. It's cool out here. Marcia let it lay around her shoulders. B did thoughtful things like that. Orville did too. They meant well enough. This hill farm seemed a lonely place to them. Away from town, hard to heat and keep up, at least for a man like Orville, who was a better putterer than a farmer. She watched the bedroom furniture go, all but her own bed that they had taken over to B's house, with a load of fruit and trunks and things B wanted. Marcia remembered how smoothly the drawers of the highboy pulled, and how the top drawer of the chest used to stand in Matt's room always smelled of Macassar oil, since the time he spilled a whole bottle in it. Remembering that, it was hard to believe that Matt had been dead 32 years. And then they were driving down Ryder Hill in the slow creeping dusk. Orville let the car down over the thank you ma'ams the way you let a baby carriage down steps. Ryder Hill wasn't a road that was meant for automobiles in the first place. The thank you ma'ams had been built into it to let the horses rest a little on the way. Now the county no longer bothered to keep the road up, and witchgrass and goldenrod grew up in the middle. She knew without looking back how each curve and turn would close on the hill, how the house was standing dark and empty on its knoll. She had not cried. She'd only gone down the walk feeling tired and lonely. The road seemed short tonight, shorter than she ever remembered it. Already she could see the lights from the village. "Here we are," Bee's voice triumphed. The car lights picked out the little bungalow. Marcia was frightened looking at it, then suddenly tired, worn out with thinking and remembering and feeling. The cramped cottage was unimportant. Bee and Orville were unimportant. All her world, all her desires had shrunk to a craving for a warm, soft bed and a quiet room. Not to talk, not to feel, just to be left alone. She dreaded the effort of getting out of the car, of the cold creeping up around her legs. "First thing, we'll get you right to bed, Mrs. Elder," Bee said, coming back from unlocking the door. Her voice was capable. It went round Marcia like a warm coat. She let herself be wrapped in it. She was very tired and old. Thank you.
Sue Talbot, a community volunteer and a member of the Montana Arts Council, with an excerpt from Mildred Walker's The Southwest Corner. We appreciate Sue's contribution to the evening. You are tuned to the Missoula Public Library's Night of 1,000 Stars. We are broadcasting live from the meeting room of the City Library in Missoula. This is the first live remote broadcast for Missoula Community Access TV, so it's a real thrill to be a part of that as well. Let us continue with our program tonight. Geneva Van Horn joins us this evening. Geneva is a professor at the University of Montana, and her reading is entitled A Tall Tale.
Instead of a tall tale, I'm reading a section, an excerpt from Little House in the Big Woods by Laura Ingalls Wilder. Here's the story Pa told Laura and Mary one evening. The story of Pa and the Voice in the Woods. When I was a little boy, not much bigger than Mary, I had to go every afternoon to find the cows in the woods and drive them home. My father told me never to play by the way, but to hurry and bring the cows home before dark, because there were bears and wolves and panthers in the woods. One day I started earlier than usual, so I thought I did not need to hurry. There were so many things to see in the woods that I forgot that the dark was coming. There were red squirrels in the trees, chipmunks scurrying through the leaves, and little rabbits playing games together in the open places. Little rabbits, you know, always have games together before they go to bed. I began to play I was a mighty hunter stalking the wild animals and the Indians. I played I was fighting the Indians until the woods seemed full of wild men. And then all at once I heard the birds twittering good night. It was dusky in the path and dark in the woods. I knew that I must get the cows home quickly, or it would be a black night before they were safe in the barn, and I couldn't find the cows. I listened, but I could not hear their bells. I called, but the cows didn't come. I was afraid of the dark and the wild beasts, but I dared not go home to my father without the cows. So I ran through the woods, hunting and calling, and all the times the shadows were getting thicker and darker, and the woods seemed larger, and the trees and the bushes looked strange. I could not find the cows anywhere. I climbed up hills looking for them and calling. I went down into the dark ravines calling and looking. I stopped and listened for the cow bells, and there was not a sound but the rustling of leaves. And then I heard a loud breathing and thought a panther was there in the dark behind me. But it was only my own breathing. My bare legs were scratched by the briars, and when I ran through the bushes, their branches struck me. But I kept on looking and calling, Suki, 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 I shouted with all my might, Suki. Right over my head something asked, who? Oh, my hair stood straight on end. Who? Who? The voice said again. And then how I did run. I forgot all about the cows. All I wanted was to get out of the dark woods and to get home. The thing in the dark came after me and called again, who? Well, I ran with all my might. I ran until I couldn't breathe, and still I kept on running. Something grabbed my foot, and down I went. Up I jumped, and then I ran. Not even a wolf could have caught me. At last I came out of the dark woods by the barn, and there stood all the cows waiting to be let through the bars. I let them in and then ran to the house. My father looked up and said, "Young man, what makes you so late? Been playing by the way?" I looked down at my feet, and then I saw that big toenail had been torn clean off, and I'd been so scared I had not felt it hurt till that very minute. Pa always stopped telling the story here and waited until Laura said, "Go on, Pa, please, go on." "Well," Pa said, "then your grandpa went out into the yard and cut a stout switch. And he came back into the house and gave me a good thrashing so that I would remember to mind him after that. A big boy, 9 years old, is old enough to remember to mind," he said. "There's a good reason for what I tell you to do, and if you'll do as you're told, no harm will come to you." "Yes, yes, Pa," Laura would say, bouncing up and down Pa's knees. And then, what did he say? He said, "If you'd obeyed me as you should, you wouldn't have been out in the big woods after dark, and you wouldn't have been scared by a screech owl." If you like this excerpt, ask your parents and librarians for the other 7 Wilder books in the historic fiction series. Maybe you'd like to choose one of them to read aloud to your family this May. And I know you'd like one of them, many of them, but start with one of them. And happy reading to all of you. Thank you.
Geneva Van Horn, a professor at the University of Montana, joining us tonight for the Night of 100 Stars at the Missoula Public Library. We're focusing national attention tonight with a number of other libraries in the country on family literacy and the importance of families reading together. As the program continues, it's a pleasure to introduce Helen Herbert with the Missoula Women for Peace. She has an essay from Anne Morrow Lindbergh's Gift from the Sea.
Some of you may be familiar with this book of Anne Morrow Lindbergh's. I think that most women have had it at some time or another and thoroughly enjoyed her thoughts about life. The thoughts in this book are wound about the sea, a beach, and an island. These same elements have interwoven through Anne Morrow Lindbergh's life. As a girl, she spent summers with her family on a Maine island. After her marriage to Charles Lindbergh in 1929, she accompanied him on his survey flights around the North Atlantic to launch the first transoceanic airlines. The tragic death of their first child forced the Lindberghs to move to Europe for protection and privacy. When the war brought them back to the United States, they established a permanent home on a Connecticut coast, where they lived quietly, wrote books, and brought up their family of 5. After the children left home for lives of their own, the Lindberghs traveled extensively to Africa and the Pacific on environmental research. For several years, they lived on the island of Maui in Hawaii, where Charles Lindbergh died in 1974. Anne Morrow Lindbergh has now returned to the Connecticut home, where she welcomes children and grandchildren from time to time and continues her writing projects. One of their sons lives up near Potomac at the Lindbergh Ranch. I pick up my sisal bag. The sand slips softly under my feet. The time for reflection is almost over. The search for outward simplicity, for inward integrity, for fuller relationship. Is this not the limited outlook? Of course it is, in one sense. Today, a kind of planetal point of view has burst upon mankind. The world is rumbling and erupting in ever-widening circles around us. The tensions, conflicts, and sufferings, even in the outermost circle, touch us all, reverberate in all of us. We cannot avoid these vibrations. But just how far can we implement this planetal awareness? We are asked today to feel compassionately for everyone in the world, to digest intellectually all the information spread out in public print, and to implement in action every ethical impulse aroused by our hearts and minds. The interrelatedness of the world links us constantly with more people than our hearts can hold. And this book was written 20 years ago. Or rather, for I believe the heart is infinite, modern communication loads us with more problems than the human frame can carry. It is good, I think, for our hearts, our minds, our imaginations to be stretched, but body, nerve, endurance, and lifespan are not so elastic. My life cannot implement in action the demands of all the people to whom my heart responds. I cannot marry all of them, or bear them all as children, or care for them all as I would my parents in illness or old age. Our grandmothers, and even with some scrambling, our mothers, lived in a small circle, enough to let them implement in action most of the impulses of their hearts and minds. We were brought up in a tradition that has now become impossible, for we've extended our circle through space and time. Faced with this dilemma, what can we do? How can we adjust our planetal awareness to our Puritan conscience? We're forced to make some compromise. Because we cannot deal with the many as individuals, we sometimes try to simplify the many into an abstraction called the mass. Because we cannot deal with the complexity of the present, we often override it and live in a simplified dream of the future. Because we cannot solve our own problems right here at home, we talk about problems out there in the world. An escape process goes on from the intolerable burden we have placed upon ourselves. But can we really feel deeply for an abstraction called the mass? Can one make the future a substitute for the present? And what guarantee have we that the future will be any better if we neglect the present? Can one solve world problems when one is unable to solve one's own? Where have we arrived in this process? Have we been successful working at the periphery of the circle and not at the center? If we stop to think about it, are not the real casualties in modern life just those centers I have been discussing? The here, the now, the individual and his relationships. The present is passed over in the race for the future. The here is neglected in favor of the there. And the individual is dwarfed by the enormity of the mass. America, which has the most glorious present still existing in the world today, hardly stops to enjoy it in her insatiable appetite for the future. Perhaps the historian or the sociologist or the philosopher would say that we are still propelled by our frontier energy, still conditioned by our pioneering pressures, or our Puritan anxiety to do ye the next thing. Europe, on the other hand, which we think of as being enamored of the past, has, since the last war, strangely enough, been forced into a new appreciation of the present. The good past is so far away, and the near past is so horrible, and the future so perilous, that the present has a chance to expand into a golden eternity of here and now. Europeans today are enjoying the moment, even if it means merely a walk in the country on Sunday, or sipping a cup of black coffee at a sidewalk cafe. Perhaps we never appreciate the here and now until it is challenged, as it is beginning to be today, even in America. And we have not also been awakened to a new sense of the dignity of the individual because of the threats and the temptations to him in our time to surrender his individuality to the mass, whether it be industry or war or standardization of thought and action. We are now ready for a true appreciation of the value of the here and the now and the individual. The here, the now, and the individual have always been the special concern of the saint, the artist, and the poet, and from time immemorial, the woman. In the small circle of the home, she has never quite forgotten the particular uniqueness of each member of the family, spontaneity of now, the vividness of here. This is the basic substance of life. These are the individual elements that form the bigger entities like mass, future, world. We may neglect these elements, but we cannot dispense with them. They are the drops that make up the stream. They are the essence of life itself. It may be our special function to emphasize again these neglected realities, not as a retreat from greater responsibilities, but as a first real step toward a deeper understanding and a solution of them. When we start at the center of ourselves, we discover something worthwhile extending toward the periphery of the circle. We find again some of the joy in the now, some of the peace in the here, some of the love in me and thee which go to make up the kingdom of heaven on earth. The waves echo behind me. Patience, faith, openness is what the sea has to teach. Simplicity, solitude, intermittency. But there are other beaches to explore. There are more shells to find. This is only a beginning.
Helen Herbert with the Missoula Women for Peace joining us this evening at the Missoula Public Library for the library's Night of 1,000 Stars. In case you are just joining us, this is being broadcast, telecast as well, by Missoula Community Access TV on Channel 22 on the cable system. We hope you will stay with us as we have a number of other dignitaries from the community who are contributing to this effort to stress literacy and the importance of family reading during this Library Week 1990. And now would you please welcome our next reader, the Honorable Dan Kimmis, the Mayor of the City of Missoula.
I have a book for kids, and if any of the kids are tired of sitting still and want to come up here, this book has some pictures in it. If you want to come up close here, I'll show you some pictures, okay? My book is A Bargain for Francis. It's by Russell and Lillian Hoban. And I've read this to all my kids. It was a fine summer day, and after breakfast, Francis said, I'm going to play with Thelma. Be careful, said Mother. Why do I have to be careful, said Francis. Remember the last time, said Mother. Oh, which time was that, said Francis. That was the time you played catch with Thelma's new boomerang, said Mother. Thelma did all the throwing and you came home with lumps on your head. I remember that time now, said Francis. And do you remember the other time last winter, said Mother. I remember that time too, Francis said. That was the first time there was ice on the pond. Thelma wanted to go skating and she told me to try the ice first. Who came home wet, said Mother. You or Thelma? I came home wet, said Francis. Yes, said Mother, that is why I say be careful. Because when you play with Thelma, you always get the worst of it. Well, said Francis, this time I do not have to be careful. We are not playing with boomerangs, we are not skating, we are having a tea party, and we are making a mud cake. Be careful anyhow, said Mother. All right, said Francis. Frances took her dolls to Thelma's house. She took her alligator doll and her elephant doll. She took her snake doll and her teddy bear too. As Frances walked to Thelma's house, she sang, "Alligators, bears, and me are very fond of drinking tea. The elephant and the wiggly snake are happy when they eat their cake." Frances and Thelma made a mud cake. They put daisies on it for frosting. Then Thelma got out her dolls and her tea set. "I am saving up for a tea set," said Frances. "I am saving all my allowances." "This is the best kind to get," said Thelma. "It's plastic and it has red flowers on it." "That's not the kind I want," said Frances. "I want a real china tea set with pictures on it in blue. The tea set I want has trees and birds and a Chinese house and a fence and a boat and people walking on a bridge. I used to have that kind of tea set, but all I have now is part of the teapot. The rest of it is broken." "That's why that kind of tea set is no good," said Thelma. "The cups break and the saucers break and the teapot and the cream pitcher and sugar bowl break and then the set's all gone. My tea set has red flowers and it does not break unless you step on it." "Well," said Frances, "I am saving up for the other kind." "How much have you saved up?" said Thelma. $2.17, said Frances. "How much does the tea set cost?" said Thelma. "I don't know," said Frances. "I'm sure they cost a lot," said Thelma. "It will take you a long time to save up all that money." "I know," said Frances, "and I wish I had a tea set now." "Maybe I will sell you mine," said Thelma. "I don't want yours," said Frances. "I want a real china one with pictures on it in blue." "I don't think they make them anymore," said Thelma. "I know another girl who saved up for that tea set. Her mother went to every store and could not find one. Then that girl lost some of her money and spent the rest on candy. She never got the tea set. That's what happens. A lot of girls never do get tea sets, so maybe you won't get one." "If I buy yours, I will have a tea set," said Frances. "You said you didn't want it," said Thelma. "And anyhow, I don't want to sell it now." "Why not?" said Frances. "Well," said Thelma, "it's a very good tea set. It is plastic that does not break. It has pretty red flowers on it. It has all the cups and saucers. It has the sugar bowl and the cream pitcher and the teapot. It's almost new, and I think it cost a lot of money." "I have $2.17, said Frances. "That's a lot of money." "I don't know," said Thelma. "If I sell you my tea set, then I won't have one anymore." "We can have tea parties at my house then," said Frances, "and you can use the money for a new doll." "Well, maybe," said Thelma. "Do you have your money with you?" "I'll run home for it," said Frances. "All right," said Thelma. "I will think about it while you run home for your money." Frances ran home for her money. When she came back, Thelma said, "I will sell you my tea set." Frances gave Thelma her money. Thelma gave Frances her tea set. "No backsies on this," said Thelma. "All right," said Frances. no backsies. Frances went home with her tea set and her dolls, and she sang, "A plastic pot can pour the tea for my dolls and friends and me just as well as china. Red is just as good as blue. Plastic cups are all right too, just as good as china." When Frances got home, she showed the tea set to her little sister, Gloria. "That is a very ugly tea set," said Gloria. "What's the matter with it?" said Frances. "It's ugly," said Gloria. "It's a nice tea set," said Frances. "It's plastic," said Gloria. "It has red flowers. It's ugly. I like the china kind with the pictures all in blue." "You can't get that kind anymore," said Frances. "They don't have them in the stores." "Yes, they do," said Gloria. "They have them now at the candy store. My friend Ida got one yesterday, and she showed it to Thelma. So Thelma knows they have them at the candy store. They cost $2.07. Frances walked slowly to the candy store. She looked inside, and there was Thelma. Thelma gave the storekeeper her money. The storekeeper gave Thelma a china tea set with pictures all in blue. Thelma did not see Frances as Frances walked away. Frances sang a little song as she walked away. "Now that plastic's what I've got, backsies are what there is not. Mother told me to be careful, but Thelma better be bewareful." Frances thought about no backsies all the way home. When she got home, she put a penny in the plastic sugar bowl of her tea set. Then she called Thelma on the telephone. "Hello," said Thelma. "Hello," said Frances. "This is Frances." "Remember," said Thelma, "no backsies." "I remember," said Frances, "but are you sure you really want no backsies?" "Sure, I'm sure," said Thelma. "You mean I never have to give you back the tea set?" said Frances. "That's right," said Thelma. "Can I keep what's in the sugar bowl, too?" said Frances. "What's in the sugar bowl?" said Thelma. "Never mind," said Frances. "No backsies. Goodbye." Frances hung up. Frances waited for the telephone to ring, and when it rang, she said, "Hello." "Hello," said Thelma. "This is Thelma." "I know," said Frances. "I just remembered," said Thelma. "I think I had something in the sugar bowl. I think it was a ring. Did you find a ring?" "No," said Frances, "and I don't have to tell you what's in the sugar bowl because you said no backsies." "Well," said Thelma, "I just remembered that I put some money in the sugar bowl one time. I think it was some birthday money. I think it was $2, or maybe it was $5. Did you find money?" "You said no backsies," said Frances, "so I don't have to tell you. I don't have to say how much money is in the sugar bowl." "Well," said Thelma, "it's my money and I want it." "Do you want backsies?" said Frances. "Do you want your tea set back and you will give me my money back?" "I can't," said Thelma, "because I used the money for a new tea set. There's only a dime left over. I'll give you the new tea set and the dime. The new tea set is the china kind you want. It has pictures all in blue." "You said they don't make that kind anymore," said Frances. "This one was very hard to find," said Thelma, "and I think it was the very last one in the store." "All right," said Frances, "bring it over." Thelma brought over the china tea set and the dime, and Frances gave back the plastic tea set. Then Thelma took off the lid of the sugar bowl and saw the penny. "That's not a very nice trick to play on a friend," said Thelma. "No," said Frances, "it's not. And that was not a nice trick you played on me when you sold me your tea set." "Well," said Thelma, "from now on I will have to be careful when I play with you." "Being careful is not as much fun as being friends," said Frances. "Do you want to be careful, or do you want to be friends?" "I want to be friends," said Thelma. "All right," said Frances, "then I will give you halfsies on the dime." Frances and Thelma went to the candy store with the dime. Frances bought bubble gum, and Thelma bought lifesavers. Then they went back to Frances's house to skip rope. Gloria came out and to turn the rope and skip too. "You and Gloria can skip first," said Frances to Thelma. "I will go last." Thelma skipped first, then Gloria. Then Frances skipped, and she sang, "1 for plastic, 2 for china, 3 for yours, and 4 for mine, 5 for tea, and 6 for cakes, 7 for elephants, 8 for snakes, 9's a trip to the candy store, then comes 10, and 10 skips more. Backsies 1, backsies 2, backsies are no fun to do. Careful once, careful twice, being careful isn't nice, being friends is better." Then Frances and Thelma shared their bubble gum and lifesavers with Gloria.
Dan Kim is the mayor of the city of Missoula, joining us this evening for the Night of a Thousand Stars at the Missoula Public Library. That selection was Russell Hoban's A Bargain for Frances. Let's continue our program this evening with children's author Barbara Corcoran. She'll be reading from her new book, Stay Tuned.
I'm going to read you a few pages from a book that probably won't be published for about a year, publishers being the speed demons that they are. It takes me 6 or 8 weeks to write it, and for some reason it takes them a year and a half to publish it. It's called Stay Tuned, and the reason I wanted to read this one tonight is that it's dedicated to Marcia Dunn and the Pea Green Boat. Chapter 1. Stevie huddled on the narrow cot with her feet pulled up under her, the baseball bat held tight in her hand. She thought she had heard a rat, but it was a huge cockroach that scuttled across the floor. Her father said there weren't any rats here, but she knew better. She had seen one right here in this disgusting room. That was when she bought the bat. She looked at her watch for the 100th time. Her father was later than usual. She hoped he wasn't in some bar. He never used to have more than a sociable beer with his friends when they lived in Iowa. But after her mother died 3 years ago, he brought home the first of the bourbon bottles. Still, you couldn't drink too much and take care of a big farm. It wasn't until he lost the farm to the bank and he and Stevie left Iowa and came to New York that it got really bad for a while. She heard someone screaming out in the hall. She shuddered and looked at the door chain to make sure it was fastened, although she knew it was. There was a lot of screaming and terrible weeping in this hotel. Her father said it had been a luxury hotel once, but that must have been 100 years ago. The wallpaper was stained and faded. The one window in their room opened on an air shaft and was streaked with dirt, and the whole place smelled terrible. It's just for a few days, her father said. They had come to New York because he had been here for a year when he was a young man, and he thought of it as familiar. But he had been dismayed at how changed it was. Times Square, she could remember how he used to describe New Year's Eve in Times Square. It was one of the first places he took her, but it was all porno shops and sleazy, scary-looking places, and the people pushed you right off the sidewalk if you got in their way. Stevie had been terrified. "I guess things have changed," her father said, "but I'll have a job in no time, and we'll live in the suburbs. The East has more jobs than they can get people for." He had counted on an old college friend whose address on East 48th Street he had hung on to for years. But when they went over there, the brownstone where the friend had lived had been torn down. For a week, they stayed in a cheap motel on the edge of the city. Stevie was afraid to go out alone while her father went job hunting, and anyway, she didn't know how to get anywhere. So she stayed in the dingy room, reading and trying not to be scared. It was a new experience, this terror. At home, she had thought of herself as fairly competent. She could drive a tractor, milk a cow, and help a cow calve. She could work all day in the cornfield at harvest time. Sometimes something frightened her, like the time lightning struck the barn when she was in it, or the time their old horse cornered her up against the fence and would have crushed her if her father hadn't come along. But things like that were nothing like the cold, continuing fear that stayed with her all the time here. They had to leave the motel because it cost too much. Somebody in a bar had told her father about this hotel, which was a little cheaper. It was in the West 30s, which saved her father subway fare, but that was all you could say for it. A lot of welfare people lived here. Prostitutes hung around downstairs, and drug dealers roamed the halls. Today she had to go out to the deli to get some food, and a filthy old man with long white hair had grabbed her. She had to hit him to get away. Luckily, she was big for 14, and the farm had given her muscles. She ran all the way back to the hotel and up the 3 flights of stairs. She knew better than to take the elevator where you could get trapped with some creep. She got off the bed now, making sure the cockroach had disappeared, and got a bag of pretzels. There was a tiny refrigerator that never got very cold, but at least it kept food safe from the roaches. She sat on the bed again. The 2 cots and 1 3-legged chair were the only furniture. She munched on a pretzel, wishing her father would come. She was going to tell him that they had to get out of here, even if it meant asking Uncle Tim to take them in. Uncle Tim, her father's much younger brother, had a dairy farm somewhere in New Hampshire. She had never seen him, and her father hadn't either since Uncle Tim graduated from college and married a New Hampshire girl whose parents left them the farm. Once every 4 or 5 years, the brothers exchanged Christmas cards, but that was all. It was pride that kept her father from not getting in touch with his brother. He didn't like to admit he'd lost his big, prosperous farm. But Stevie was going to insist. In a place like New Hampshire, her father could surely get a farm job. He wasn't trained for the kind of jobs that were available here. She remembered when her mother was dying of cancer, she had said to Stevie, "Look after your father. He's a good man, but he's not cut out for sorrow and failure. We're farm women. We're strong. Don't ever forget it." She had seen, long before her husband would admit it, that the farm was in trouble. The drought, the administration, new expensive machinery that hadn't been paid for. Somebody banged on Stevie's door, but it wasn't her father's knock of 2 short ones, a long, and another short. She tensed and picked up the bat again. Those doors were not strong. But in a minute, whoever it was went away. She leaned her head against the wall, trying not to hear the noise outside that never stopped. The car horns, the roar of traffic, the banging of garbage cans, yells, and sirens. She heard the voice of the boy in the next room. She had seen him on the stairs, dragging his little sister along fast, not looking at anyone, the way she herself had learned to do. The boy looked about 12 or 13, thin and pale, with dark hair that needed cutting. The little girl wasn't more than maybe 5. She had seen the mother only twice, a pretty young woman with an empty face, too much makeup, flashy clothes. Yesterday, the mother had met a man on the stairs and gone off, laughing excitedly, a suitcase in her hand. Stevie had never spoken to the boy, but she liked to listen to him through the thin wall, especially when he did his pretend radio broadcasts, apparently to amuse his little sister. He did everything from fast-talking ball games to news and weather in different voices. He was a good mimic. He made Stevie smile and feel somehow comforted, just as his sister probably felt. "This is station KILL," the boy's voice said. "Your favorite heavy metal station. And this is your favorite DJ, Eddie the Deadly." He'd changed his call letters. Yesterday it had been station HELP. She had wondered about that, but the things he said were funny, so she decided that HELP was a joke. But KILL? Here comes the weather report, folks. Heavy storm front moving in from the North Pole. 6 feet of snow expected tonight. Visibility 0. All traffic halted. Don't I wish, Stevie thought. It was swelteringly hot in the room. "Food supplies almost gone," he went on. Something in his voice had changed. There was a note of panic. Or was she imagining it? Maybe their mother had really left them. Or was he just playing a game? She pressed her head closer to the wall, but the broadcast had ended without his usual sign-off. For a few minutes she sat listening, but there were no more sounds. She wondered if they were all right. Maybe tomorrow she would knock on their door and make sure they were okay. Thank you. He has a happy ending.
Children's author Barbara Corcoran with an excerpt from her book, which, as we heard, should be released perhaps within a year. The book is titled Stay Tuned. If you are just joining us this evening, this is the Night of 1,000 Stars. We are broadcasting from the Missoula Public Library. We are in the meeting room of the Public Library this evening. A great crowd on hand as we stress the importance of family literacy and the importance of families reading together. That's what this is all about in conjunction with National Library Week. We are broadcasting on Channel 22, and in fact, this is the first live remote broadcast for Missoula Community Access TV. Let's continue our program this evening. It's a pleasure to welcome Marcia Dunn, a very well-known name in the community, of course, from the Pea Green Boat, which is a real favorite on KUFM radio. Marcia's selection tonight is Barbara Cooney's Miss Rumphius.
Thank you, Barbara. When Barbara told me that she was going to dedicate her book to listeners of the Pea Green Boat and to me, I walked on air for a long, long time. And she's one of the reasons I picked this book to read to you today. And if you'd like to come up and sit on the floor, I won't mind at all. It's Miss Rumphius, Story and Pictures by Barbara Cooney. I chose it for one reason because we celebrated Earth Day this week, and for another reason, many of the people that are called stars tonight and are reading to you are people who have found a way, like Miss Rumphius, to make this world a more beautiful place. Some of them write books, and some of them make music, and for some of them it's public service. The Lupine lady lives in a small house overlooking the sea. In between the rocks around her house grow blue and purple and rose-colored flowers. The Lupine lady is little and old, but she has not always been that way, I know. She is my great-aunt, and she told me so. Once upon a time, she was a little girl named Alice who lived in a city by the sea. From the front stoop, she could see the wharves and the bristling masts of tall ships. Many years ago, her grandfather had come to America on a large sailing ship. Now he worked in a shop at the bottom of the house making figureheads for the prows of ships and carving Indians out of wood to put in front of cigar stores. For Alice's grandfather was an artist. He painted pictures, too, of sailing ships and places across the sea. When he was very busy, Alice helped him put in the skies, and that's what she's doing in this picture. In the evening, Alice sat on her grandfather's knee and listened to his stories of faraway places. When he had finished, Alice would say, "When I grow up, I too will go to faraway places, and when I grow old, I too will live beside the sea." "That is all very well, little Alice," said her grandfather, "but there is a third thing you must do." "What is that?" said Alice. "You must do something to make the world more beautiful," said her grandfather. "All right," said Alice, but she did not know what that could be. In the meantime, Alice got up and washed her face and ate porridge for breakfast. She went to school and came home and did her homework, and pretty soon she was grown up. Then my great-aunt Alice set out to do the 3 things she had told her grandfather she was going to do. She left home and went to live in another city far from the sea and the salt air. There she worked in a library, dusting the books and keeping them from getting mixed up, and helping people find the ones they wanted. Some of the books told her about faraway places. The people called her Miss Rumphius now. Sometimes she went to the conservatory in the middle of the park. When she stepped inside on a wintry day, the warm, moist air wrapped itself around her, and the sweet smell of jasmine filled her nose. "This is almost like a tropical isle," said Miss Rumphius, "but not quite." So Miss Rumphius went to a real tropical island where they kept cockatoos and monkeys as pets. She walked on long beaches, picking up beautiful shells. One day she met the Bapa Raja, king of the fishing village. "You must be tired," he said. "Come into my house and rest." So Miss Rumphius went in and met the Bapa Raja's wife. The Bapa Raja himself fetched a green coconut and cut a slice off the top so Miss Rumphius could drink the coconut water inside. Before she left, the Bapa Raja gave her a beautiful mother-of-pearl shell on which he had painted a bird of paradise and the words, "You will always remain in my heart." "You will always remain in mine, too," said Miss Rumphius. My great-aunt, Miss Alice Rumphius, climbed tall mountains where the snow never melted. She went through jungles and across deserts. She saw lions playing and kangaroos jumping. And everywhere she made friends she would never forget. Finally, she came to the land of the lotus eaters, and there, getting off a camel, she hurt her back. "What a foolish thing to do," said Miss Rumphius. "Well, I have certainly seen faraway places. Maybe it's time to find my place by the sea." And it was, and she did. From the porch of her new house, wouldn't you love to live by the sea like that? From the porch of her new house, Miss Rumphius watched the sun come up. She watched it across the heavens and sparkle on the water, and she saw it set in glory in the evening. She started a little garden among the rocks that surrounded her house, and she planted a few flower seeds in the stony ground. Miss Rumphius was almost perfectly happy. "But there's still one more thing I have to do," she said. "I have to do something to make the world more beautiful." "But what?" "The world is already a pretty nice place," she thought, looking out over the ocean. The next spring, Miss Rumphius was not very well. Her back was bothering her again, and she had to stay in bed most of the time. The flowers she had planted the summer before had come up and bloomed in spite of the stony ground. She could see them from her bedroom window, blue and purple and rose-colored. "Lupines," said Miss Rumphius with satisfaction. "I have always loved them the best. I wish I could plant more seeds this summer so that I could have still more flowers next year." But she was not able to. This is Miss Alice Rumphius in bed, wishing she could plant more seeds. After a hard winter, spring came again. Miss Rumphius was feeling much better. Now she could take walks again. One afternoon, she started to go up and over the hill where she had not been in a long, long time. "I don't believe my eyes," she cried when she got to the top, for there on the other side of the hill was a large patch of blue and purple and rose-colored lupines. "It was the wind," she said as she knelt in delight. "It was the wind that brought the seeds from my garden here, and the birds must have helped." Then Miss Rumphius had a wonderful idea. She hurried home and got out her seed catalogs. She sent off to the very best seed house for 5 bushels of lupine seed. All that summer, Miss Rumphius, her pockets full of seeds, wandered over fields and headlands, sowing lupins. She scattered seeds along the highways and down the country lanes. She flung handfuls of them around the schoolhouse and the back of the church. She tossed them into hollows and along stone walls. Her back didn't hurt her anymore at all. Now some people called her that crazy old lady. The next spring there were lupins everywhere. Fields and hillsides were covered with blue and purple and rose-colored flowers. They bloomed along the highways and down the lanes. Bright patches lay around the schoolhouse and the back of the church. Down in the hollows and along the stone walls grew the beautiful flowers. Miss Rumphius had done the third, the most difficult thing of all. My great-aunt Alice, Miss Rumphius, is very old now. Her hair is very white. Every year there are more and more lupines. Now they call her the Lupine Lady. Sometimes my friends stand with me outside her gate, curious to see the old lady who planted the fields of lupines. When she invites us in, they come slowly. They think she's the oldest woman in the world. Often she tells us stories of faraway places. When I grow up, I tell her, I too will go to faraway places and come home and live by the sea. That is all very well, little Alice, says my aunt. But there is a third thing you must do. What is it, I asked. You must do something to make the world more beautiful. All right, I say, but I do not know yet what that can be.
Marcia Dunn from KUFM Radio, host of the Pea Green Boat, and selection this evening, Barbara Cooney's Miss Rumphius, as part of our Night of 1,000 Stars as we broadcast live from the Missoula Public Library in conjunction with National Library Week. We'd like to welcome, as our program continues this evening, Esther England, the director of the University of Montana Opera Program. Esther, play.
You guys, can you come real close? Come real close. Okay, the book I'm going to read is called Harry and the Lady Next Door. Do you know who Harry is? Dirty Dog? Okay. It's by Jean Zion, and the pictures are by Margaret Bloy Graham. And the reason I picked this book will become obvious to you when we go, okay? Because it's about Harry and a lady who sings really loud. Okay, here we go. Harry was a white dog with black spots. He loved all his neighbors, all except one. He did not love the lady next door. The lady next door sang. She sang high and loud. When she sang, Harry's ears hurt. Can you see why? She sang higher than the peanut whistle. When she sang, the peanut man put his hands over his ears. She sang louder than the siren on the fire engine. When she sang, the firemen put their hands over their ears too. She sang higher and louder than the cats sang. When she sang, the cats all ran away. Harry tried everything to make her stop. He howled under her window. Can you howl? Ooh! Ooh! Good. And all Harry's friends howled too. Ooh! Ooh! Good. But it did not do any good. The lady next door went on singing. She sang higher and louder than ever. Well, one day, Harry's family gave a party. They invited the lady next door. She came with her music. When she started to sing, Harry almost bit her leg. But he bit the leg of the piano instead. See, there he's biting the piano. See? He bit the piano. The family sent Harry out of the room. You are a bad dog, they said. Harry just wagged his tail. As he walked to the door, some people said, poor Harry. But others whispered, he's a lucky dog. When Harry pushed the door open, the wind blew in. It blew the pages of music off the piano. They blew all around the room. Everybody tried to catch all the music, but nobody could. The pages blew out the door and into the garden. They blew over the fence and up into the trees. Harry caught some of the pages, but he did not bring them back. He ran away with them instead. He ran until he came to a very quiet spot. He dropped the music and lay down, and soon he fell asleep. Okay. In a little while, something woke Harry up. All around him were cows mooing. They mooed very low notes. Harry listened. He thought the cows made beautiful music. Moo, moo. He had never heard anything so soft and low. He wished the lady next door would sing like the cows. Suddenly, Harry had an idea. He rounded up all the cows, he barked at their heels, and down the road they went. Harry barked, and the cows mooed. They ran on and on. They ran down the main street of the town. They passed the school, the library, and the firehouse. When they came to Harry's house, the lady, of course, was still singing. Harry ran ahead and stopped the cows. They went on mooing and mooing. They mooed and mooed and mooed. They all mooed soft and low. The cows mooed for a long time, but it did not do any good. The lady next door went on singing. She sang higher and louder than ever. Harry's family called the man who owned the cows. He came and took them home, and he was not happy with Harry. Look at the man. He's mad. That night, Harry slept in the doghouse. The next day, the lady next door sang some more. Harry's ears hurt more than ever, so he went for a walk. After he had walked for a long time, he heard a wonderful sound. Oompa, 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 oompa. It was low and lovely. Then Harry saw what it was. It was the big horn in the fireman's band. The big horn was even softer and lower than the cows mooing. Harry walked along listening. He wished the lady next door would sing like the big horn. Then he saw the leader of the band. The leader threw his stick up into the air, and Harry watched. Suddenly he had another idea. The next time the stick went up into the air, Harry caught it. Harry ran in front of the band. The leader ran after Harry, and the band ran after the leader. Soon the leader was all out of breath. He stopped running. But the band ran after Harry. The men played as they ran. They were running and running and running. Harry led them all down the main street of the town. They passed the school, the library, and the firehouse. Harry stopped the band in front of the lady's house. She was still singing. The big horn player played even softer and lower than before. Oompa, 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 oompa. He blew and blew and blew right under her window, but it did not do any good. The lady next door went on singing. She sang higher and louder than ever. When the leader got there, he had Harry's family with him. Harry gave the stick back. And that night, he slept in the doghouse again. A few nights after that, the family took Harry to the park. They were going to hear the fireman's band. The family knew that Harry liked the big horn. They got to the park and sat down. A light shone on the stage. The people were quiet. They waited for the music to begin. Harry closed his eyes and listened. He waited for the big horn. He waited for the soft, low notes. Oompa, oompa, oompa. But the low notes never came. Instead, a man came out. "Good evening, friends," he said. "The band will not play tonight. The big horn player is all out of breath. Instead, we shall have a singing contest. And here are the ladies who will sing." Everybody clapped when the ladies came out. On the end of the line was the lady next door. Harry took one look and ran away. He was almost out of the park when he heard something. Bloop, 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 bloop. It was low and beautiful. Harry stopped and listened. It was even softer and lower than the cows and the big horn. He wished the lady next door would sing like this. Then he saw where the sound came from. It came from inside a watering can. Suddenly, Harry had another idea. He took the handle of his can in the mouth, and then he ran with it. When he got back to the bandstand, he walked quietly up the stairs. The lady next door was singing. Harry put the watering can on the floor behind her. Soon the lady sang a very high note. Yay! Then something happened. 2 frogs jumped out of the can. One jumped on the lady's head, and the other jumped on her shoulder. The other ladies in the contest shrieked and ran away from the stage. But the lady next door went on singing. She sang higher and louder than ever. When she finished her song, everybody shouted, "Hooray!" The judges whispered together, and then one of them spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "the other ladies in the contest have all gone home. So the lady next door wins the singing contest. She is a brave lady. She wins first prize. It means that she can study music in a far, far off country for a long, long time." Everyone clapped and clapped. Harry barked and barked. He was the happiest of all. In the middle of all the fuss, the frogs hopped home. Soon the time came for the lady next door to go away. Harry went to the ship with the family to see her off. "Goodbye, goodbye," everybody shouted, and Harry wagged his tail. The lady next door started to sing a goodbye song, but no one even heard her. Just as she sang the first note, the ship blew its foghorn. Moo! It was a deep, low, wonderful sound. As the ship moved away from the dock, the other boats all blew their foghorns too. Harry thought it was the most beautiful goodbye song he had ever heard. The end.
Esther England, the director of the University of Montana Opera Program, joining us this evening at the Public Library for the Night of 1,000 Stars. I'd like to introduce to you at this time the MC for the second half of tonight's program. Sheila Callahan is the owner of KMSO FM 102 Radio in Missoula. I'd like to say now thank you very much for letting me be a part of the Night of 1,000 Stars. It's difficult, if not impossible, to turn down any request that is made of our time by the Missoula Public Library, and it's always an honor to be associated with them. Thank you.
I think that we've all enjoyed the readings this evening. They've ranged from readings that I'm sure many of the adults will want to check out at the library to books that the adults will want to read to the children. We have a number of readings still ahead of us tonight, but I think it's appropriate at this halfway point if I ask our television crew to permit us to take a short 2-minute break. And we will come back after that 2-minute break to hear a reading of poems by Robert Service from one of our county commissioners, Barbara Evans. Thank you.